And I go downstairs and I look out the window and I see like mad police officers.
What did they say you were arrested for? What are the actual charges?
It was like a 10-count indictment, identity theft, stolen property. It added up to like facing 25 years on paper.
What are the news saying about you? What were those articles and the headlines like?
They set my bond super high. They set it at $100,000. And they're like, yeah, you know, he stole over $1.3 million. And so after the courthouse, they brought me into a holding cell. And then they moved me downstairs where I was awaiting transfer to Rikers.
So do you feel like you were wrongfully accused and convicted then? In this episode, you're going to hear Dylan Syer tell his side of a story that made national headlines, the accusations of fraud and identity theft that destroyed his business and landed him on Rikers Island. For the first time, Dylan explains what he says really happened, how he was set up, and what it was like being sentenced to a year of weekends at one of the most notorious jails in America. Dylan, welcome to Locked In. Thanks so much for coming out. The snow delayed us yesterday, but we're back.
Yeah, thank you. It's this has been terrible the last few days.
We got like 2 feet of snow.
2 feet, yeah.
It's a lot of snow. I haven't seen that much snow in years.
Yeah, no, they said 5 years is the last time we've had a storm like that.
Especially in New York, right?
Yeah, 5 years, and then we have sub-zero temperatures right now, so it's brutal.
And I think it's 8 degrees here right now.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. You can't be out there for more than 5 minutes without, you know, your face feeling it's getting ripped off.
When you're in the city, do you actually see all that snow? Like, where do they put it all?
Yeah, right now, because if it had melted, if it had gotten above freezing, like it would melt, you know what I mean? But at this point, it's just turning into straight ice, and there's nowhere to put it. Like, and I think it's illegal actually for them to dump it in the river because it's a mix of salt water and fresh water sometimes, you know, and whatnot. And so it just sits there until it melts.
Wow.
Which hopefully is sometime soon, but it doesn't look like it.
What a mess.
Yeah.
Well, tell everyone about your podcast that you got going.
Yeah, I started my own podcast, The Syer Consultant. Same things we'll discuss today, just discussing my story. I never really got my story out there and whatnot, the background of my case and everything like that. And then, you know, my background before my case and then where I'm at now and whatnot. So that's the arc of it.
So like a limited series type podcast?
No, I mean, I plan on doing it. I feel like I have a bunch of different things I can talk about going forward, but I wanted to put my story out there because my case is interesting because you can look up my information online and it will tell you about my criminal arrests. It was highly publicized at the time, but after that, there's no follow-ups. And I took a long time to think about it, and I decided it was time to like put my own story out there and give my own take on it for people that didn't know what had happened after my initial arrest. Because if you go online and you look up my name, it just has all the same syndicated posts of my arrests, but there's no follow-up to it, including you have no information on it. Like the only way you'll know is if I tell you, and I wanted to tell people what had happened.
Yeah,
to get my story there.
I think that's so relatable to so many of the guests that come on the show. And even in my story too, there was for so many years, it's just that old article that sits there.
Yeah.
And there's nothing new to tell the public basically how you've recovered from that.
And like to me, it's the white elephant in the room because, you know, I've worked for myself since I was 21, 22 years now. And then I've worked with a bunch of individuals. I don't know whoever looks me up, you know, and they might look me up and I don't know about it and they don't want to bring it up because it's awkward. And it's not fair to me because I don't have my side of the story out there. You know what I mean? So it's a whole different thing that I really contemplate about. Like, do I want to put this information out there years later? Because my case is a little older now, but I decided that was the best thing to do, to just someone close to me said, own your narrative. And I think that's good words of advice, to own your narrative and just put it out there. And now the elephant's gone and the cloud is lifted. And now I know if people know, they know, or they can look it up and at least get two sides of a story. And I think, you know, like anything else in this world, that's extremely important.
Where do you grow up?
I'm originally from like the Metro Detroit area. My background is I grew up near the Detroit border when I was younger. I moved out to the suburbs a little further in the Detroit area, graduated high school, went to Michigan State, didn't finish. I dropped out after 3 years actually, and then started working. Like I got to that point where even though I did 3 years of college, I hit one of those periods of my life young where I didn't think what I was doing is what I wanted to do anymore. I didn't know what degree to pursue, even though I was pursuing business. I didn't know what to do specifically. So then I ended up dropping out of college working, and then I met a bunch of people, and then after all these years has led me to the path that I've led on now. But I've lived in a good amount of different places. I lived in Boston. I went from Michigan. I moved out of Michigan when I was like 21 or 22. I lived in Boston for a little bit. I went from Boston to LA for a little bit. I went from LA to Atlanta for 2 years. And then I went from Atlanta to New York City, where I'm currently at. And I've been in New York since 2017. So almost 9 years now.
Were you always passionate about business, even as a kid?
No. That's like the crazy part is I love sports. Like that was always my thing. Sports, infatuated by sports. I'm going to be a basketball player when I grow up type thing. Obviously that never worked out. And I never even saw myself like being the type to leave Michigan. But I don't know. I just grew older and I grew out of my shell, and I just felt more comfortable in taking risks. And just like I said, one thing led to another. But yeah, I wasn't like an entrepreneur from a super young age. You know what I mean? I mean, when I was 21, 22, I started doing my own thing, as I said. But no, it wasn't something like when I was younger that I want to start my own business or anything like that.
What was your parents' background?
We came from, to be honest, like upper middle class. Like my parents divorced when I was younger, when I was like 5. Typical custody battle thing. I mean, to this day, I actually don't have a relationship with my biological father. I don't have any qualms with him. It's just, it is what it is. I'm really close to my mother. She was doing like mortgages, and she got burnt though because she was doing mortgages right before leading up to the Great Recession, where the mortgage industry collapsed. So she was doing well for a while until that happened. And then being in Michigan, my stepdad, she got remarried. He did like robotics on in manufacturing plants, like that supplied parts for the big 3 companies, the automotive companies. And then the Great Recession happened. He lost his job. Both of them lost their jobs. So that was like a tough time in my life. That was like around like 08, 09. And I graduated high school in 2009. So those were interesting. I think that shaped me a lot too, those periods of my life, because that was a lot of stress, like with graduating high school and deciding what I want to do with my life. And my mom and my stepdad ended up getting divorced at that time, and there was some financial problems and everything like that. So before that, we lived a comfortable life. I pretty much was raised an only child, even though I have an older half brother, but he's 10 years older. So we're close, but you can't be that close when you're 10 years older at that age, And so I lived a good life. Yeah, I didn't come from a wealthy background, but I had what I needed, you know what I mean, at the end of the day.
What were some values your mom instilled in you as a kid?
Cleanliness more than anything. I feel like I'm like super OCD now, like not where it needs to be prescribed, but like I'm super organized and oriented, and I can still be a pessimist, don't get me wrong, but she was always about that too. Like, don't be a pessimist, don't procrastinate, and she was just always very hardworking, so she's definitely instilled that on me. She's never looked for a handout, you know what I mean? And to this day, she's retired now officially. They live down in Florida, but she still works, you know what I mean? Even though she's retired, she's always doing something. She stays fit. She's just a super good woman. And yeah, I appreciate all the things she's done for me. She's helped me out a lot. So
do you think those money issues and struggles that you're just describing put a lot of pressure on you in your early, say, college years to kind of excel and find your path?
I think with money, I was always interested in the nicer things in life. So like I said, I was always comfortable. I wasn't like I said, I wasn't a trust fund kid or anything like this, but I was comfortable. And in college, like finances got tight for my mom and my stepdad before they got divorced. And, I had some scholarships to Michigan State and everything like that. So that made it better. But I don't know how ran into but I just found a niche for like the nicer things in life. Like, and that's kind of how I ended up where I am now. But I just like, when I was in college, I started getting really interested in luxury items, even though I couldn't afford it. But it was really weird. I got really interested in fashion, and that's where a lot of my story comes from, the beginning of my background, from starting on this path that ended up leading to my case and meeting the people that I met throughout all these years. But I got fixated on like fashion for whatever reason. High-end fashion though, specifically. I don't mean like just styling, or I just meant like I liked high-end brands that were super exclusive. I've always been fascinated with exclusivity, for sure.
What do you think it was about that? Do you think it was, not fitting in as a kid, or?
No, I just like when I grew up, I always, I fit in with the trends. Like I grew up when I was in middle school, I grew up during like the jersey era, like the sports where everybody was wearing jerseys, and you'd watch like MTV, and like the rappers and stuff like that were wearing football jerseys and basketball jerseys. And I was always fascinated with that. And at that time that was exclusive, and sneakers were super exclusive back then, Jordans and all these different things. And then I think it just progressed and progressed and progressed. And I started looking into things on my own, and I started finding all these brands that I had no idea about that had been around for a long time, going back, to the, like your Dior's, these designers that have gone way back to the 1940s, 1950s. And then I realized all this history with these brands. And I always liked what other people can't have access to, or is hard to have access to. And I don't mean that from a gloating standpoint. I just mean I always found that an interesting concept, where there's things that are out there that even if you want them and you have the money to purchase them, they're still extremely difficult to obtain. So, and I built a business model out of that. So
how did you convert that into a business, that mindset?
So I looked for, like, in the world today, everything is saturated. And at that time, things were less saturated, but they were still saturated. I looked at it like, how do you obtain things that are super niche and introduce them to a market that doesn't know about them as much, and then convert on that? Because if you can control a market and have relationships where you can obtain niche items that are sold to a specific type of clientele, you can ride that out. You know what I mean? Like, things are recession proof at that point. I had a passion for it anyways, so that made it super interesting in terms of business aspect for me.
And did that start while you were in college, the business, or would that come after?
So what had happened was, in college, like Kanye at the time had released like the album My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and he was like super, Kanye was it at the time, like 2010, 2011. And him and Pharrell Williams, I always looked at them like those guys were so far ahead of there are people still catching up to those guys. And that was, 20 years ago, 19, 18 years ago. They were killing it. In 2005, 2006, they created their own brands. And I got into like Kid Cudi in college. Like at that time, Kid Cudi like really took off. And I was resonating with his music, and I loved his style. He had like a dope style. And I started looking into what these guys, Lil Wayne too, I started looking into what these guys are wearing. And I'm coming across like these Kid Cudi's wearing these jeans. These are $200, $300. I'm like, that's crazy. Now I'm seeing Lil Wayne's wearing these sneakers that are $300. And then Kanye is wearing sneakers that are $600 and a pair of jeans that are $1,000. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like I didn't even know that existed. And I did a ton of research, and then I ended up dropping out of Michigan State. At Michigan, I ended up working for a super high-end boutique in Michigan. And at that time, they were the only high-end boutique in men's. They started off with streetwear, but then they started catering to like luxury brands. And I got an opportunity to work for that store. And then that's where like everything took off for me. Like that's when I started experiencing the brands for myself, and I was selling the brands, and that's like where I was, and I loved it. I loved having access to things, even though I still couldn't afford it at the time, but I still loved being able to understand these brands, the history of these brands and whatnot. So it was really cool.
At that period of time, because you couldn't afford the brands, did you ever do anything that was against your own morals to wear those types of items, or was your head still pretty clear?
No, I was good. I didn't do anything. Like I just worked at the store. Like the owner would give us discounts and stuff like that. Like obviously, like you can't be a slouch walking in and like working for a store that sells all these brands. But where I made up for it was like I was on point about knowing the history of the brands, knowing everything down to the fabric, why it's so expensive, why the prices are quote justified, which I don't agree with that anymore. But at that time, I was totally in that world where I was like, I'm just going to sell it, even if I'm not wearing it. But I would save up my paycheck. I worked a lot, you know what I mean? Like at that store, they worked me to the bone, and I didn't mind it. I loved it. So I got to meet a lot of cool people, And then I would save up paychecks and I would buy what I could. I started getting like little pieces here and there. And, you would get a discount on things that wouldn't sell as well and whatnot. Because we'd have things in Michigan, like Michigan's not New York City. To this day, it doesn't come close to the market of New York City or LA or all these other Miami or things like this where where especially in New York, they're fashion forward and they know about these brands. There's old money. People don't know about these brands. So even if they had the money, it was really hard to convince people in Michigan to purchase these brands because they're like, this is absolutely insane. They didn't know about these brands either. So it was, that made my sales ability to go up to be able to sell things to people that they never heard of that were so expensive.
Do you think that taste for the finer things can be addicting?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big problem with people now. It's like, it's an attention seeking thing. I think, I'm not gonna lie, at a certain point in time, like I molded myself into this bubble of people that only cared about that stuff. And at the end of the day, that stuff doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It doesn't make you a better person, doesn't make you a worse person, but it doesn't make you like your shit don't stink. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people now they want to be seen. The same can be said with watches, cars, clothing, homes, like all these things are luxury items. You don't need them, but you want them. So yeah, I think there's definitely some type of reaction there where people, they get into that cycle, and if they have the money, or like there's a lot of people that don't have the money. That's also the problem. A lot of people don't have the money to be spending on high-end luxury items, but they'll do it anyways. What do they go? Keep it up with the Joneses. You don't need these things, but people feel that it's necessary. So it's an interesting concept.
Why did you end up leaving that store?
Ironically enough, I got fired because, and this has nothing, they thought I was doing some shady stuff. At the time, I was working with a lot of the clients that I gained out of that store, and we would have a lot of athletes. It was one of the wealthier areas in Michigan, if not the wealthiest city, little small city in the suburbs of Detroit called Birmingham. And they always had like the high-end shops. And the basketball players that would come and play the Pistons would stay in a hotel around the corner at the time. So that's how we would get a lot of our clientele, and they would walk through the store. And we would this was like the early days of Twitter. We would blast them on Instagram and Twitter and come into the store. We'll take care of you, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of them would come in. Like I met Carmelo in the store, Carmelo Anthony, and some other big name guys. And so I ended up getting fired because I would help sell. This is where I started my side business while I was still working there. I was selling a lot of high-end items that we didn't carry to a lot of the athletes that I met. And the owner knew it, and he didn't care because it didn't affect our business because we didn't sell those items anyways. But then this was like the early days of when credit card fraud had became a thing. And I remember I had a guy reach out to me, and like it was hard to sell items in that store, like I said, because most of our items were sold to athletes or phone orders. We didn't have people in Michigan buying those things. So even though we had this beautiful, nice store, people would come in, but they weren't buying anything, not enough to keep the lights on, you know what I mean? So I was getting a lot of out-of-state orders, and I remember there's this one time this guy reached out to me via Instagram. I would do a lot of, like I said, outreach on Instagram in the early days when it was a lot easier. And they're like, oh, we want to buy this, we want to buy that. And we were never trained to monitor for identity theft or like chargebacks or send in authorization forms or a copy. Like we didn't do that. That's not that. I didn't do that. Nobody else in the store did that. And long story short, somebody took me and the store for a lot of money, and like chargebacks, they were buying a lot of stuff. And it was like became one of my top clients. And it wasn't an athlete. It was just, I don't know who the person, they probably gave me a fake name. And then they obviously gave me somebody else's card. And then the chargeback started coming in, and then they basically accused me of like being in on that, but I didn't even know anybody from New York at that time. So that's ridiculous. But I got fired because of that. But then I ended up starting my own thing, and it was unfortunate what happened, but that taught me lessons early on. And then I just ended up going out and doing my own thing after that once I got fired, because I had clients from who I met at the store, athletes and whatnot. So.
And your own thing was that business you were describing?
It was the same thing. So I had already had connections with different boutiques across the country that sold similar items. But then, so for me to not have access to our items allowed me to have access to the items we sold, but now I could sell them on my own, like, and make money off of whatever I charge for them, as opposed to at the store. We didn't even earn commissions. I worked my way up to a manager, and we were just on an hourly. Like any store like that makes commissions these days, but we didn't even earn commissions or anything like that.
And at that time, were any of your clients well known, or were they just people with money?
No, they were NBA players. Yeah, I probably over the years at a certain point in time, not like all at once, but I had probably worked with over 100 NBA and NFL players. So the early days, I met some pretty, some that I'm still cool with to this day. Some athletes that would buy from the store, and my very first client, that I would consider my client was an athlete. We're still cool to this day. He's an NFL, well, former NFL guy. And so I just kept those clients as I left the store, and I just went to all the boutiques and started trying to find all the most exclusive items and then shooting them to the clients. And then I didn't know anything about business though. My parents didn't have a entrepreneurial, so I just did it all on my own. I had no help really. And I had to figure out how to form an LLC on my own, how to figure out how to bookkeep on my own, and how to manage cash. Because the problem was my business model was I would always buy the items first and then get reimbursed on the back end. So I had to open up a merchant account, and it was hard being that young and then not having any business background because the banks at the time were a little more strict about what you do. And then so I opened up a merchant account, but then at the time, like it would take like almost a week for the funds to clear when you would charge a card. So that would hold me up because I needed to buy things for a client, but I would have funds tied up because I never made them pay me in advance. That's how I did it. So there was a lot of hurdles, a learning curve.
When I got out of prison, my credit was absolutely destroyed. I didn't really understand how credit worked before that, and once I was out, I felt it immediately. Apartments, phones, cards, interest rates, everything was harder. It honestly felt like no matter how much I was trying to move forward, my credit was keeping me stuck in the past. I wish I had known back then that fixing your credit doesn't have to be complicated or overwhelming. Ava is a credit building app that's designed to work fast and help your credit score where it really matters, so your credit score could start climbing with almost zero effort. That's what I like about Ava. It's simple and realistic. Instead of locking up money in a secured card and waiting weeks, Ava can approve you in minutes with up to a $2,500 credit limit and no credit check. You just use the Ava Credit Builder card to pay for the subscriptions you already have, and Ava reports those on-time payments to all major credit bureaus, which helps build real credit history fast. They can even report things like rent, utility, and phone bills, including up to 2 years of past payments, so stuff you're already paying for could finally start working in your favor. I know how stressful it is to feel like your credit score controls your options. Ava keeps it simple, transparent, and low stress. No hidden fees, no gimmicks, just tools that actually help you move forward. So take control of your credit today. Download the Ava app, AVA, and when you join using my promo code LOCKEDIN, you'll get 20% off your first year, monthly or annual, your choice. Again, grab the Ava app and use my promo code LOCKEDIN so they know you heard it from me, and you'll get 20% off any plan for up to a year. That's promo code LOCKEDIN. Thanks to Ava. Now go get yourself good credit. So now are you reaching out to them weekly saying, hey, we have this new designer coat or pair of shoes available? Do you want it? Or are they hitting you up saying, hey, Dylan, I need X, Y, and Z?
Both. A lot of more outreach. Like I would have contact with the boutiques, with the associates at the boutiques, whether a manager or a sales associate. They're blasting me with photos. I send out the photos to the client directly. They say, how much? I put my added fee on it, whatever. They say, okay, I want that. Cool. I buy it from the store with my money. Then I charge their card. I get reimbursed on the back end. And then sometimes it became a thing where people are just sending me, hey, can you find me? Like when things got really well, it took a while to get to like really make money. You know what I mean? To build my like
Rolodex.
Yeah, to build my Rolodex where it's like I would have guys who would buy stuff like here and there, but I was trying to find the guys that were just like constantly buying. But I would have a lot of guys that would buy something like once every few weeks or once a month, or you would think that they just disappeared on you, but you just got to stay consistent, and they would come out of nowhere like, hey, yeah, I'll take that. How much? And then also, like I said, once I built the Rolodex, I would have people that would reach out to me and say, hey, can you find this? Because they realized I was good at seeking out things as well. So,
and is the profit a set fee for your services, or are you charging a percentage on each item?
It was dependent on the item. Like the harder the item was to find, the more I would charge, the more of a margin I would make. And then if it was something that I felt was like a little more accessible, then I would, but I'd basically charge what I felt I couldn't set a price because certain clients, there were certain clients that I know would pay more, and there's certain clients that I know were a little more stingy with their money. So, but I always try to make it fair. I was never trying to like give these people prices where they would walk into the store one day and see the item there on the rack and be like, what the fuck? Like, I got ripped off. That was never an issue or anything like that. So, and I would always tell them up front, like, what it is. And if they, I would have plenty of people be like, oh, that's too much. They thought it'd be less. That's too much. I'm not paying for it. So,
now, do you hand deliver to them, or is it always shipping?
At the time, it was, always throughout, it was probably 95 to +% shipping items. Sometimes I'd have a client come in town and I would hand deliver them something or whatnot. I always tried to reach out, link up with the clients in person if possible. Or if I went to a city and traveled, I'd always try to meet up with them in person. I was always trying to make it more than just like, hey, I'm buying you things and delivering and making money off you. I like a lot of these guys I became friends with. I've been to their homes. Some of them I've been to 2 of their weddings. You know what I mean? I've met their kids. Anything and everything. So I always try to make it just as much of a friendship as it was a business, relationship.
And how do you verify that all these products are real?
I've worked with some of the like most stores that go back, one in Boston that I worked with for years and spent millions of dollars with them with clients. They were mom and pop, and they went back to the 70s. Like they were the OGs of bringing in men's high-end wear and stuff like that. So like, it's just one of those things. If it's like you have these high-end department stores, they're legitimate. I'm not buying from some third party. I'm buying from a very well-known established business, and they still all exist to this day, all of them,
And what's the most do you think you made in a year doing this business?
I was definitely doing well over $1 million in revenue.
That's
not net.
sale.
No, yeah, sales, gross revenue. I was definitely doing well over $1 million at the height. Several millions of dollars in gross revenue, and then I was probably making the top. I probably made like near 500 to $250,000 I netted in a year.
Do you bring in employees? Do you open up space, or is this all just you?
That's why I crushed it, because I had never had any overhead. My overhead was my apartment. I would write that off as my office because I would work from home all the time. Or I'd travel and write off all the expenses because I'm going to cities and I'm buying items. Wherever I was at, I was always buying items for clients and sending them back. I'd always try to go to the boutiques I never visited and develop a relationship with them. Oh, I buy items for this person, and they would give me their numbers. I would work with them. So I'd had a whole Rolodex now of all these boutiques across the country. And then, so that was the way it worked.
Now, are there more of people like you that exist in the country too? Like these personal boutique shoppers, I guess?
So at that time, like, no. That's why we were like the few of us that existed were able to do so well. Now it's like, I got out of it a while ago, even before my case, because I got sick of it because everybody and their cousin was doing it. And then, like, a lot of athletes would just start bringing, like, their friends would do it for them, or their manager, or, it was usually like a family member or something like that. And then I was just like, I don't want to deal with this anymore, things became too accessible. That's what I loved about it. Things were not accessible, as I said to you earlier. They were niche. And then once the brands didn't used to want to work with athletes. Like they thought that was like, no, we don't work with professional athletes. We work with high-end, wealthy people that are under the radar. Once they realized that, but a lot of these companies are publicly traded now, so they have to make sure they're constantly growing. Once they realized they could tap into the athlete world, then, these NBA players you have guys making $10 million a year. They don't even play. They're sitting on the bench. You have the top guys making, top contract now is like $60 million a year. Forget about baseball and football. So the market is billions and no, it's got to be trillions of dollars. Like the contracts are insane. The Dodgers alone have a $1+ billion payroll. So the money is insane. So once these brands realized they could tap into the athlete market, they let it go crazy. And then they started. It used to be hard to find sizes for athletes because they're so big, especially basketball players because of their height, or football players because of their size. And then once the brands realized that was a whole untapped market, they opened the floodgates and everything became super accessible. So my relationships became less and less because other people were able to go to them because they would have more items to sell. And of course, the associates are doing that because they're getting paid commissions or hitting target sales goals and whatnot. So it ruined it for me.
I'm sure social media changed things a lot too, because the brands can reach out directly, or these individuals, if they're just sitting on the bench, they're now recording on social media, them wearing, say, a Gucci outfit to the court.
Everything is exposed now. You have pages that follow certain high profile people telling you what they're wearing, the price point of what they're wearing, where you can find it. I was doing a lot of internet shopping back then too, like finding boutiques overseas. They would ship it to you when there used to be a price discrepancy. You could find something in Europe for cheaper and they would ship it to you, and the import duties would be so low you would get it for cheaper than it would be in the United States. That doesn't exist anymore. They price matched all across the world. They figured that out a long time ago, that they were losing money on that. And then there's just no exclusivity anymore. The exclusivity that exists now in the luxury market for like watches and high-end like handbags and things like that, or these like super high-end jackets that can be like, I've seen jackets that are $50,000. Like, yeah, they'll tell you it's like, that might be like a 1 of 4 in the world, but you got to find a billionaire at that point basically to find that. You know what I mean? A lot of athletes can't fit certain things as well, even if they want it. So yeah, they killed the exclusivity, and social media worked to my advantage at first because I could do so much cold outreach. And then once I got a little following, certain people, back then you could see who's following you. Oh, I know this guy on this team, he follows him, like he must be legit. And I would just cold outreach Instagram all day long. And then now it's like that gets buried amongst, if you try that now, you're never going to get, you got to get in an inner circle. Athletes don't like people that they don't know. And I got in the inner circle with a lot of athletes early on. Now it's like you can't do that unless you're, managing them or whatever it is, or somebody personally from a long time ago.
So what year and where were you when you walked away from this business?
It was actually right around the time that it was right before COVID. Like I was still buying things, but I had pivoted to like watches, mainly high-end watches. I got more so out of the fashion. Like I still had a few clientele, but I really wasn't doing it as much because, like I said, the exclusivity was gone and it wasn't worth me to, make lower. I was making a killing on watches, selling high-end watches. That became my new thing. That was super niche still at the time. And then same thing, that's gotten ruined as well now. But it was right before COVID. It was like, I was tailing off in 2018. And once 2019 happened, I pretty much just stopped doing it entirely for the clothing items and sneakers and all that stuff like that.
Now, how does this lead to you getting into trouble?
So the person I got in trouble with, I never met them. I never had any contact with them directly, but I had a third party that worked for them that reached out to me in 2015. Actually summer 2014. So I worked with them for a long time, and I would do the same thing I did with everybody else. I would send them photos to their third party team member, and then they would give me that person's credit card information, and then I would charge their card just like anybody else. But lesson learned, I didn't do this with any of my clients, not just this client where I ended up getting in trouble with. But I would never, same thing, I never learned my lesson. I never did authorization forms or kept people's IDs on file, or I would do the big no-no and I would ship things that didn't go directly to their billing address, which can lead instantly in a chargeback. And there's no way for me to prove that that person received that item. So I had dealt with this person for a long time, or at least their team member for a long time, was buying them things over a long period of time, just like I was for my other really good clients. And then in 2019, right around the time I was done wrapping up, I was still buying a lot for this person and my other top clients. And then I got a notice at my bank account one day. I went to go log in and my bank account was frozen, but it didn't say it was frozen. It literally said my checking account, my business checking account was like, it was literally like negative $999 million, something like that. But I guess that's like a bank code where like when they freeze your account, they just put that automatic thing in the system. So I was like, what the fuck? Negative 999. So my business account was frozen, and I reached out to like a lawyer that had helped me set up my company, and I was like, what's going on with this? And then I ended up getting chargebacks, hundreds of thousands of dollars in chargebacks spanning, I think chargebacks typically you're only allowed to go like 6 months back. before the bank like won't do a chargeback because that's past their period of time where they're in their terms of agreements where they'll help you out. This person was somehow able to get over that, and I got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in chargebacks. And then they froze my account as well. So so I lost out on all that money. It came out of my account, and then that's when that whole thing started. But that was 2019. But I didn't get arrested until 2021. So I was wondering what had happened with that. I knew that these chargebacks had happened with this individual, but the person I dealt with never reached out to me. We just ceased doing business. That was it. They never reached out to me, and I reached out to them and crickets. But it's not like I had any idea what was going on. And I had this lawyer look into it, and he had somebody that worked in his firm that was like a former DOJ prosecutor. And they're like, we don't see anything in the federal, like there's no indictments against you or anything like that. So I just took the L, like a fat L, a crazy L, hundreds of thousands of dollars that got given back to that person, that got reimbursed to that person. And I just kept moving on with my life. Like I said, at that point already, I was still doing well with the watches. It didn't crush me. Obviously, it was a major, major sting.
So they got the money back, but did you have that money to make up for it or no?
Not to make up the amount that was taken, but I was still doing well. Like at that time, I had invested also like back into investment properties in Michigan. I was doing like build outs on 2 commercial properties that I purchased.
So the credit card companies ate the cost then?
Yeah. Yeah, because I wasn't able, and nor did I try to pay them back. And then I had a Amex that like I racked up like a large bill, and I couldn't pay the Amex off in full. I think like I had like 120,000. Like I had one of those charge cards where like you don't have a set spending limit. Like they'll raise it with the amount. So at one point I got it up to like they would allow me to spend like $250,000 a month on it. And I always paid it for years. And then I had like $120,000 balance I needed to pay off because of all the items that I was buying for the clients. And then they froze the account. Or I think before they froze the account, the chargebacks started coming in. And then after the chargebacks, I think that's when they froze the account because they took the money first, then they froze the account. And then I wasn't able to pay it. I had some money in some other accounts, and I had to settle with them for like, I ended up paying still like 90,000 of it off over the 120 that I owed. So we settled, and then I just moved on, and I just took the L, and then nothing came about it until like when I got arrested in 2021.
So Amex was the person, or Amex was the card that person was using to buy merch from you?
Yeah, Amex. Well, it was a MasterCard as well. It was a little bit of both. It was mostly Amex, and Amex, you tell Amex like a business like spit in your taco, and they'll give you like a lot of businesses won't take Amex because of that reason. They also charge a little higher of a fee, but it's mostly because they are so reputable for giving back the client money, especially this client. That's probably, God knows that's one of the best clients. So they're obviously going to give them their money back or whatever.
So did the cards come after you at that time at all? They didn't ask you for the bill or anything?
They never did. No, the card company never came after me.
So they just refunded the client's money and that was it?
And they ate it. Yeah. And obviously I paid what I could for like my charge card. That had nothing to do with, the money that they weren't able to get back. But yeah, they ate it, and Amex and MasterCard never came after me. No, they never sued me or anything like that.
Now, this middleman person that you were dealing with, did you know who he or she was working for?
Yeah, it was a high-end, super high-profile A-list celebrity.
And so a couple of years go by, you're doing the watch business?
Well, yeah, so I was doing the watch business, and then that even started to slow down into COVID because like you can't sell watches and I was sourcing watches from all over the place, and I was traveling to Europe a lot because I had a friend that had a store there, and we came up with throughout my journeys in life, I went to Paris for Fashion Week. I met a good friend of mine who's still a good friend of mine. We ended up becoming partners in the watch business. He had a good friend of his that was a client that had worked at a watch store, and we realized we could buy watches in the United States, and I could bring them to Europe, and we could sell them, and we could chop up the margins 3 ways, and we were making good money. So a lot of people like, oh, after my case happened, they look at my Instagram still. I leave up all these things because I was doing business, and it didn't even have anything to do with this person. I was selling millions of dollars in watches and revenue over the course of like 2 years. We did millions and millions of dollars in watch purchases and selling, and so I was focused on that because it allowed me to travel, and that was my new niche. I fell in love with watches, high-end watches that people couldn't get. And then that winded down into COVID because the world shut down. I wasn't able to travel and whatnot. And then COVID, I was pretty much just coasting. I was like working on the I got kind of screwed over. I was working on a commercial property in Michigan that was finishing up. I was doing a full gut renovation build out, and then I got shut down with the when COVID, with the full shutdowns in March 2020. And but I didn't get arrested until February 2021. So I kind of just coasted through COVID. I got a few PPP loans, super low, just to carry my for my commercial property and like my shopping business with the watches. I didn't get in trouble for the PPP loans. I took out what I was allowed to take out. I didn't fake the numbers or anything like that. So in my case, I never had anything to do with like the PPP loans or anything like that.
So how do you find out then that there's a case against you?
So it's like, I should have known. I always had this weird feeling in the back of my head that like freezing, that account stayed frozen throughout that account, and nobody could ever tell me anything on it. I contacted Chase. They sent a letter to their legal department, and they just kept it under wraps. They're like, "Oh, we don't know. It's weird." They just didn't say anything. And then so much time went on, 2 years, literally. I just didn't think about it, but I should have always known that like that was always going to be something, right? That was. So 2021 comes. I remember it was the day after the Super Bowl, February 2021. Yeah, and then I'm sitting there, and like I live in Queens at the time, and it's like 7 a.m. and I had a townhouse, and I had a friend living with me at the time, and it was like 3 stories, and we had a video intercom where you could ring it, like how a ring, but it was like its own built-in video intercom in this townhouse, and they were ringing it. It was like 7 a.m. I'm like, what the fuck? And I go downstairs and I look out the window and I see like mad police officers, like more than 5, between 5 and 10 or something like that. I'm like, what the fuck? And then I'm like half awake, so it feels like a dream. And I go down, you have to go downstairs to like click on the intercom to talk to them. And then I didn't talk. I don't even remember if I clicked on the intercom to speak with them. I think because they were banging on the door, right? And I'm like, I have to answer it because this is clearly a situation. And I was like 3 floors, and you had to walk down a set of stairs to get to it wasn't the street level. There was another staircase that got you up to it was off the street, the unit. And then you would walk up the stairs to get into and then you would be at the ground level. And so I walked down the stairs to get to the door, and they pretty much immediately, they didn't like aggressively push open the door, but they either asked my name or they were like, "Are you Dylan Syer?" I can't remember which, if they asked my name or they already knew my name. And either way, I said, "I'm Dylan Syer," and they immediately put me in cuffs. So they raided my place. They raided my townhouse, and then they put me in cuffs, and they brought me up to the living room, and they put me down on the sofa. And then my poor friend at the time had no idea what was going on, and they brought him down. But they told him straight up, they're like, "Look, like, we're just here for him. You don't got nothing to worry about." So yeah, they raided the place, and then I asked for the search warrant, and then and then it went back to going back to the chargebacks.
This episode is brought to you by Gold Drop Seltzers, and this is one I actually drink. I'm sober, but I still like having something in my hand that feels like part of the moment, not an afterthought. Gold Drop fits perfectly. Gold Drop Seltzers are clean, crisp, and refreshing. No alcohol, no heavy sugar, no weird aftertaste. Just a solid seltzer you could crack open at a party, a cookout, or while watching the game and not feel out of place at all. What I respect about Gold Drop is they don't try to sell it as a replacement for anything. It's just a good drink. Whether you're sober, taking a break from drinking, or just want something refreshing that won't slow you down, this is an easy choice. And right now, you could save 10% when you order. Just head to www.thedryoak.com and use promo code LOCKEDIN at checkout. Stock up for your next hang, keep them in the fridge, or bring them wherever you're going. If you're being intentional about what you drink, Gold Drop Seltzers belong in the rotation. What did they say you were arrested for? What are the actual charges?
The charges were crazy. It was like a 10-count indictment. Like they had a grand jury indictment against me. I don't remember exactly, but it was like identity theft, possession of stolen property, like a bunch of different. It like added up to like I ended up facing 25 years on paper, but they severely overcharged me. Like it was 25 years I was facing, 10-count indictment. And I read through the search warrant, and they were looking for like high-end valuables. They were looking for like watches, I had already sold all my personal watches even before then. I only had like 1 or 2 watches. I sold them to fund the properties in Michigan. I was just like, it's COVID. I don't want these. I kind of started moving on from watches as well. They became less accessible. And I made money off the watch, all the personal watch. I wear them for 6 months and make money and sell them. So it was a freebie, you know. And they were looking for things in the apartment. They were looking for all these watches and whatnot and high end valuable items. And they're like, tell us where these items are. Otherwise, this is a nice place. It was new at the time. I was renting, but they're like, we won't mess up the place. And I was like, everything that's on this paper, like if it's here, it's in plain sight. Like I don't need to tell you. Like you're gonna find it regardless. I did have like my safe though. I had like 40,000 in cash that they took because I had a lot of clients that when they would come to me, like for watches, all I guys would pay in cash. So I had 40,000 in cash that they took. They were like, do you want to open the safe or do you want us to open the safe? I was like, you can open the safe. I was like, I'm not going to make it easy for you. And I think the detective at the end was like, I'm glad we opened it because if you had opened it, it would have caused like a legal issue or whatever. I had like some jewelry. I had like some Cartier bracelets in there. Nothing super, super crazy. It was mainly the cash that they got that was like the most valuable. But they had but at that time I didn't know. Going later on, I found out they had frozen all my accounts though. They put everything under civil forfeiture. So they froze all my bank accounts as well. But I didn't know that at the time. They didn't tell me that, you know what I mean? I just thought it was they were looking for the possessions in the townhouse.
So they bring you to the police station and do you get bailed out that same day or?
No, so I was they kind of had me down in the living room handcuffed for like an hour or so, and then they were all these agents, not agents, it wasn't the feds, it was the NYPD. And then they came in and they were going through the apartment, the townhouse, and I'm seeing them bring down bags and boxes and whatnot. And then they keep me there for a while and they're like, all right, we're going to take you in. They were nice enough. At first I was super standoffish. Like the guy was like trying to talk to me. They had like one guy that kind of watched over me and I didn't talk to him. And then he kind of started to lighten up and he's like, like with the cashless bail in New York, like you'll be out by tonight. And in my head, I was like, really? I was like, okay, I guess that's not that bad. I wish he never said that because you fucking lied his ass off. I don't know if he meant to lie. I don't see why he would have, honestly. But I'll get back to that. But they were actually pretty cool. They let me go put on like real clothes. It was February, and we had that was the last time we had a crazy snowstorm. So there was a bunch of snow on the ground still. And it was super cold out. They let me grab a jacket, change into like bullshit sweats and everything like that. They even let me brush my teeth, which is crazy. So I know people out there have terrible. I remember, hearing your story. You like get raided at 5, 6 in the morning, and like you don't know what the hell's going on. I didn't know what the hell was going on either, but they became a little more. I definitely got some courtesy for sure. They could have been straight assholes, but they lightened up a little bit because they also saw I wasn't giving them a hard time. I just wasn't talking, and I wasn't talking shit to them or anything like that. And then they put me in a unmarked car. They took me to the DA's office in Queens for some reason. I sat in a like holding cell there for a little bit, and then they moved me over to central booking after that. And I sat in central booking for a while. I didn't have a lawyer retained I didn't have like a lawyer at the time, but they let me take a number before I left. I had a guy that everything comes full circle. I just happened to know somebody that worked with me on an insurance thing. And he told me that his dad worked as a criminal defense attorney. So I took the son's number and I kept that. And so I was in central booking, and then that's when they fingerprinted me and everything like that. And then after that, I waited for a while. They took me over to the Supreme Court, the courthouse. So this is all during COVID when there was like it was a year after COVID had started, but there was a big resurgence of COVID at the time. And so there was nobody in the courthouse, obviously. It was just, and they put me in front of a public attorney, and I got 30 seconds. He's like, do you have any priors? What's your education? Blase, blase. And then so this guy doesn't know shit about shit. It's impossible. They bring me in front of the judge. They catch me off guard. They're telling I have the means to flee. I live in this $7,000 townhome, which I did, but I had my friend living there, so he put like $2,500 into it. So I was paying like $4,500, $4,600, but you have places in New York City that are $30,000, $50,000 a month plus. So don't get me wrong, it was expensive, but it wasn't what they made it out to be. So they're like, he's a flight risk, which I did have a lot of history of traveling to Europe and whatnot. So they took my they made me forfeit my passport. They tried to do the electric monitoring, but the judge is like, that's not necessary. But they set my bond super high. They set it at 100,000. And they're like, yeah, he stole over I think it was like 1.2. They accused me of 1.2 or $1.3 million that they said I had stolen. And then so after the courthouse, they brought me into another holding cell in the courthouse. They brought me into a holding cell, and then they moved me downstairs where I was awaiting transfer to Rikers. I didn't know I was going to Rikers. Because I'm listening to the detective in the back of my head, like, yeah, you're going to get out to cashless bail. And I'm like, I just got $100,000 bond. I don't think I'm getting out tonight. Like, I had the guy's number written down, the lawyer, the son. I called him. I said, is your dad still a criminal attorney? He's like, yeah. I was like, well, I'm in a bit of a pickle, a debacle here. So he put me in touch with him. I'm calling him off the phone in the holding cell. And I get on the phone with him. He's like, yeah. He's like, so... He was the one that told me. He's like, yeah, so they released a press kit about you, the Queens District Attorney, and all your assets are frozen. I was like, I don't have any time to process any of this. This is all like, I got arrested at like 7 a.m. I think I got into the, into Queens and the holding cell originally at like 8:30 or so. And then it goes into the afternoon and it goes into the evening. I'm still at the courthouse in the evening. And I got a hold of him, and then, he's just like, I told him, I was like, I think I'm going to Rikers. He's like, that's crazy. And then, I ended up going to Rikers. And even I had some crazy experiences. Like my first experience with this, I'd never been arrested in my life. I say that in my podcast. Before that, I'd never been in a holding cell in my life. So to go from 0 to $1 million was pretty intense. And there was this guy in the holding cell in the courtroom waiting to be transferred to Rikers who clearly had been to Rikers before because he said it, and they knew him by a name basis, which I thought was crazy. And he was wild now. He was trying to act out so much that he didn't want to go to Rikers, so he was trying to get sent to the hospital. And he was like, before that, we were at central booking, and I recognized his voice. He was flooding the cell and the holding cell, and then he was trying to shimmy the door off the hinge. And he looked at me. He's like, "I'll fucking stab this white boy right here." And I was like, "Bro." He was like this smaller guy, so I wasn't really threatened. But I was like, "Bro, what the fuck, bro? Like, what did I do to you?" Like, so that was like my first experience within the first not even 12 hours. And then eventually the paddy wagon for Rikers comes by every so often, and then they end up chaining me. That we get in, they cuff our wrists, and then they put us on the bus, and I'm cuffed with a guy next to me. And then, they took us to Rikers, and I think I got to Rikers around like 9 o'clock at night. So I got this initial arrest happened around like 7, 8 a.m. And I didn't get to Rikers until like 9 p.m. And I'm in a holding cell with like 25 guys. It's just benches, one toilet, overfilled holding cell, like super small, 25 guys. There's not enough room to lay on the benches, so most guys are laying on the floors. And I just ended up taking my jacket and just laying on it. It was like nearly impossible. They got the lights on full blast, obviously. Alarms keep going off. I learned later on, the alarm's always going off when there's always some type of fight or whatever. And then people are slowly getting processed in intake. Slowly, though, like one person every 2 hours or something like that. And I'm like, I just got here. There's 20 other guys here. This is going to take an eternity. Long story short, I end up sleeping a little bit throughout the night on the floor. And I end up getting brought so I'm AWOL at this point because I'm not processed. So I'm in this Rikers holding cell. I didn't get brought into medical until like 2 p.m. the next day. So it was going on almost 24 hours from my initial arrest, and it was going on 12 hours plus before the last time I had spoken to my lawyer. So nobody knows what's going on. I also asked the lawyer, I gave him my mom's phone number. I was like, can you reach out to her? Because obviously she's going to hear about this, so she doesn't at least have a heart attack. But I felt bad because I was like, I knew what I was going through, and I was already feeling terrible from this like crazy environment. But I was thinking about like my friends and family, like what I'm just trying to think. You have nothing but to sit there and think, So I'm like, I didn't get processed until the next day. I'm still not in the system, and I'm like, what are they thinking? You know what I mean? And obviously, as you know, you've done people who have done Rikers before, have their experiences. It's, you know, one of the most, if not the most notorious jail in the country. So, like I said, from never being arrested to going to that without having any idea of the environment in or what to expect was super crazy. And then, like I said, I ended up going through medical. That took forever. Then I had to go through the psych evaluation. And that's, I think, what really hit me was the psych evaluation, because this girl was talking to me, asking me questions about my background and blah, blah, blah. And she was a younger girl, so it was weird because it wasn't like I was talking to somebody older. She must have been my age at the time I got arrested. I was 29, I think. Yeah, I was 29. It was a few months before my 30th birthday in 2021. And the girl's asking me these questions, and she's kind of like asking me questions about like, I don't remember exactly what, but I had a feeling she knew what was going on about me personally. Like, obviously, anybody else, she doesn't know what their circumstances are. And I asked her a question. I don't remember what I asked exactly, but I was like, "Do you know what's going on or something like that? Like, did you see something?" And she's like, "I read an article." So I'm like, "Bro, what the fuck?" And she's like, "Yeah." She's like, just because of like your high profile situation, she's like, "I feel like we're gonna put you under suicide watch." And I never at any point in there during my initial arrest or ever felt suicidal, or that's where I was like thinking about. But I was like, that just was like a gut punch, because I was like, damn, like, this is a real thing. And they had somebody assigned to me eventually when I went into the dorms. Because what had happened, since it was COVID, you had to like be there for 2 weeks before they moved you to main housing. So I never got to main housing because I ended up getting bailed out or bonded out. But they had to make sure that nobody in the dorm tested positive for COVID before they moved you into the main housing. So I got put in a dorm with a lot of the guys that ended up being in the holding cell with. I actually ended up being in the dorm too with the guy that threatened to stab me with the door hinge, but he was cool. He calmed down. But
Why did he threaten to stab you?
he was just trying to say whatever. He was bluffing. He was just trying to say whatever he could to the staff to get taken to the hospital, because nobody wants to go to Rikers. They'd rather go to a hospital and be admitted to a hospital or psychiatric or whatever than go to Rikers. And he ended up being in the same dorm with me. I ended up spending 6 days before I got bonded out. I had bad luck too. Like the weekend came and there was a holiday. It was like President's Day. So I lost like a day there because the courts are closed. And then my bond was so high, I had to figure out how to put up the bond. I ended up putting on my properties as collateral. That's how I ended up doing that.
The properties in Michigan?
Yeah, they let me put up the properties. So those were under collateral until my bond got released when I got sentenced. So I did 6 days in Rikers, and it was just a super high intense environment because it was people, like I said, it was COVID, and I felt bad because there was people that were in there that were arrested for like one guy that I was chained to on the bus. I became cool with him, older black guy. We would play like Scrabble and shit to get the time to pass by during the 6 days that I was in there. And a lot of the other guys were younger, but it was a lot of like drug possession from what I was hearing, a lot of like, petty crime type things. The guy I felt bad that I was cool with, he was in there for not failure to pay parking tickets. Like, it's COVID, people are dying, it is it's an insane situation. They're bringing people back. They released so many people initially, and some people were back in there because they missed their court dates to report back, because a lot of people got released for minor offenses, and a lot of people that were in there were brought back because they missed their court date. So a lot of people were just in there for super minor infractions, and it was a hostile environment because, like I said, COVID, it's Rikers anyways. And for the most part, the days went by pretty quick actually. But then I had like weird instances, like at an older guy, like I learned the phone system and whatnot. They made it free or whatever. You didn't have to have money on your books to do the phones. And like one guy, but you would have a limited amount of minutes. I think it was 45 minutes a day that was broken up into different times of the day where you could speak on the phone. And this one guy offered me Suboxone once to take his minutes. I'm like, bro, like, first of all, that's for people that are overdosing on opioid or having opioid issues. You know what I mean? If I take Suboxone, I'm going to die. Second of all, I don't do hard drugs anyways. And I'm like, I'm good. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm good. But he literally tried to trade me Suboxone because he was going down to the clinic and getting Suboxone. And some of them would go down to the clinic and, treat for alcohol addiction, whatnot, methadone. They were either doing methadone or Suboxone that was given to them by the staff. And he was like, I got some Suboxone. Like, you want it? And I was like, no, I'm good. I'm good. So it's like just a bunch of crazy things. There was a fight that broke out in the middle of the night when I was sleeping. My bunk was towards the front, or not bunk, it was a cot. It was all cots, and the dorm was spread out, and then you had like one community bathroom, and you weren't allowed to leave the dorm. You know what I mean? I went down to psych a couple times. That was about it. And then all of a sudden, I wake up in the middle of the night to this commotion, and then I feel like this like heavy like itching in my chest. And there's this commotion. I realized that these two guys got into a fight in the middle of the night when the lights were off. And this guy just like beat the shit out of somebody, and the CO ended up spraying off the they don't have pepper spray, but it's like some type of mace. But you know, they like have they try to get you to stop fighting before they do it, and the guy ended up spraying it off. The problem is everybody gets affected by it. It spreads everywhere. So anybody that was in that initial area, thankfully I was towards the front, they all got like in their eyes. So I'm seeing guys run to the bathroom and their eyes are insanely red, and they're like snot coming out of their mouth and whatnot. And I was like, damn, like that was fun. And they were so pissed at the CO for doing that. Like they were cursing him out and threatening to beat the shit out of him. And then the guy that got his ass beat got taken out. And then what's called the turtles come in, and they're these guys that wear full riot gear, and they have batons and riot shields, and I can see them at the doors, and they walk in, and they're there for any type of response, like any type of fight, or any times a CO is in danger or whatnot, or like I said, fights and whatnot. So they come in, and they call them the turtles because I guess they look like Teenage Mutant Turtles, literally. And they're intimidating because they're big as hell, and you really can't see their faces because they wear these shields. Like it literally looks like, you know, they're wearing full riot gear. And then they walk in and they're like, everybody put your fucking face down. Like, don't fucking look up unless we tell you to. So they had us all like put our faces face down into the cot, and they dragged both the guys that were fighting out of there. And the guy that got the shit kicked out of him, I guess he ended up starting it for whatever reason. He was just being weird. I never saw him again. And the guy that beat the shit out of him, he ended up breaking his hand, but he came back in the dorm the next day with his hand wrapped. And that was probably the craziest thing I saw during my initial arrest, was like the mace being deployed and whatnot, and the turtles. And
so you get bailed out and you go, say, on Google to look up your case. What are the news saying about you? What were those articles and the headlines like?
So it was basically like one article that was spread throughout all the different syndicates across like CBS. It didn't matter if it was New York where I was arrested. I saw New York, I saw LA, I saw Detroit. Like the Detroit Free Press put an article out about me, where I'm originally from. I think the AP News is what released the original like news article with the statement from the DA. Like I said, they put out a press kit, and then it's all these articles, but it just said the same thing over and over again. It just said my age, where I was arrested, who I was accused of stealing from, $1.3 million, the charges, and you know, he's due back in court February 17th. And if you to this day go and look up my name, that's still the only article you'll ever see. And like I said, that's why I want to do this podcast, because I never got to tell people my story. So if you go on the internet, it's just one story. It's like trial by media. And of course, when I got access to my phone back, going through social media, I had I had like 10,000 followers at the time on Instagram or something like that throughout my years. And I'm getting trolled, super trolled. Some people are like, I don't give a fuck that guy. But a lot of people are like, yeah, like, you know, saying crazy shit. You know what I'm saying? I didn't take it to heart too much because I know how people can be on the internet. But I was just pissed at it. It just got put out so much, and I felt like I was guilty before. I saw your interview you just did with the Chrisleys, and Todd says like, in this country you're guilty now and you have to be proven innocent, as opposed to, you know, you're innocent until proven guilty. That's how I felt. I felt it was trial by media. Nobody knew my story. I didn't have any co-conspirators. It was just me. They weren't looking at anybody else. Nobody was involved in this. It was even the people I had business dealings with. They never looked into them because they had nothing to do with it. It was literally just me and my only client. That was my client that I dealt with for a period of 4 or 5 years. But I was just mad that I didn't have the ability to tell my story, especially to this day, you know? So that's why I decided to finally put out my own podcast, tell my own story, my background, where I came from, how I got involved with all these different people. And then the other part, going back to Rikers during my initial arrest, was I was sitting in a cell and they had a TV on and they had TMZ. And TMZ is like, yeah, Dylan Syer of Queens arrested today. And they're talking about me. And I'm just sitting there like, I had one other guy in the thing. They didn't put up a picture. I'm just sitting there like scratching my head. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, I'm sitting here. That was another slap in the face to see them talking about me on the TV. But while I was in there, nobody knew. You know, some people are like, oh, what are you in here for? I was just like, allegedly a fraud, white collar crime. And they're like, what's your bond? Everyone wants to know what's your bond is. I was like, 100,000. They're like, what the fuck? 100,000? Because everybody else is like 5,000, 10,000. Some guys, it's fucked up. Guys got dollar bail. They don't have any money. They don't have any family. They don't have anybody to help them out. Thankfully I had family and the properties and whatnot. So they didn't go after the properties though. That's why I was able to put them up as collateral. They didn't they didn't put a lien on the properties. That was weird. They froze all my accounts, but they didn't put a lien on the properties, and they knew about them. So like I said, it wasn't a federal case. It was a state case. So maybe that had something to do with the jurisdiction. But yeah, just super weird.
No, I'm sure the audience is curious by now why you don't say the person's name when it's all over the news. Is there a reason to that?
Because you could just look up my name. That person, it's a long time ago, and it's like public information, and I don't like to feed into it. And I'm still, what happened in the past, but like, I'm just salty about it because I don't even know the person. You know what I mean? I said that I never had the person's number. I never met them face to face, and I have to see them on TV every single day. Anyways, they're on like 4 different commercials at any given time, especially during Sunday footballs. So like people will figure it out. They can look up my name. It's right there. But I just don't like to talk about it. You know what I mean? I like to talk about the story and what happened because I felt like the whole situation was insane. But it's not a secret. You know what I mean?
Did that person ever address the claims?
No.
So you end up getting arrested, you get bailed out. How long does it take for the case to play out in court?
A year. So I got arrested in February 2021. I got sentenced in March of 2022. So they originally came at me before there was any type of discovery, the assistant, the ADA is talking to my attorney. So I retained my attorney, great guy, older guy, to this day, still a good friend of mine, even as a client. He could be my grandfather, but he's like a father figure, We have a more of a personal relationship. Like he's a mentor. I can call him for anything. That has nothing to do with that. I've never been in trouble since this bullshit. And he used to be him and his partner were the head of they represented the union for the transit authority in New York City. So they were super connected and whatnot. So I got lucky with that, not knowing really who he was going into it. The ADA contacted him and they're like, we'll give him a 3-year plea. I was facing 25. So they shot for the moon. Then they offered me 3 years. He called me like they're offering you 3 years. I was like, no, 3 years for what? Like no, absolutely not. I laughed. I was like, that's insane. Thankfully it was COVID. I didn't have to ever go into the court. It was all over Zoom. I had like a court hearing every in between 2 to 4 months. And at one point the ADA got a different job somewhere else, so they had to switch to another prosecutor. So that kind of started the clock over again. And the discovery process for them was a mess because they seized so much stuff from my place. I had receipts going back to 2014. They arrested me in 2021. I felt bad for the paralegal. They had to send me all the receipts they found in my place. It was like thousands. They had to give me a thumb drive. It was like thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of just receipts alone. But they're accusing me of stealing watches, using money to buy watches. I'm like, did you guys not know I was selling watches? They didn't. And then when my lawyer brought that to their attention, thankfully I had everything like super prepared, like accounting wise, like all the watches. Because what would happen is, I told you I had a friend that had a store. We were doing business dealings. I would bring the watches to Paris and he would sell them in a store and we would chop up the profits. His store would wire me the money. I would buy the watches in the United States and I would bring the watches back to Paris, and then his store would sell them and then we would split the margins. They didn't realize I was selling millions of dollars in watches. On my indictment, it was like, or the press release too, stole, for some reason they mentioned 5 watches in particular and over $400,000 in watches. I'm like, I sold 5 watches. I'm like, I sold hundreds of watches for millions of dollars. Where'd the 400,000? I was like, you guys are way off the mark. But the point was I didn't use money that was a whole business. And I had all the Excel sheets to prove that. And then once we brought that to their attention, they started realizing that they were pretty incompetent about the whole investigation. Not really. There was also accusing me, like pulled pictures from my Instagram, like, oh, look at the things that he was buying. I'm like, that was for a client. Like my Instagram was also advertising. I never distinguished what was mine personally. I posted a lot of personal stuff. I never distinguished what was mine and what was purchased for a client. For me, it was free advertising. If I buy something super exclusive, I would always take photos of it, try to do like cool photos, aesthetically pleasing photos. That was why a lot of people ended up following me over the years. And I would post it on Instagram. I'm like, oh, you think I purchased that for myself. I'm like, here's the invoice and the guy paying for it. So they realized quickly that like they didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. And then it went from 3 years down to like, it kept dwindling down. I got sentenced in March 2022. We worked out a deal with them to do weekends at Rikers for 1 year. 52 weekends is what I did. So I went from 25 years, facing 25 years. They offered me 3 years. And then they're like, all right, we'll give you a slap on the wrist. We can't let you off. I tried to do community service. They're like, no, that's not going to happen. I was like, 6 months community service, a year community service. I'll do it. I don't care. I don't want to do Rikers weekends. We spoke to them, to the ADA. That was our negotiation with them. They had to go to their higher ups, and they agreed to it. And I also had the civil case as well, where they're like, oh, you owe 1.2 million in restitution or whatever. We end up settling on that. I think I paid. They also I never said anything because why would I? They overvalued a lot of the items they took from my place. They're like, we value this item at this. I'm like, that's not what it's worth whatsoever. But it worked to my benefit because they looked like they got more for restitution purposes. I paid them out. I think I settled to make it go away. Like, so they took the 40,000 in cash at the place. That I think I had some investment accounts. They left the properties alone. I had some investment stocks and whatnot. I think I had another 50 to 75,000 in stocks. They sold those, liquidated those. I had some other cash, and then the value of the items that they took, I think it amounted to be like, in their eyes, around 250,000, 200 to 250,000. So we signed off on that. That was what they took. But remember, they accused me of stealing 1.2 million. They were happy with the 200,000. So they were happy. And then they gave me some items back. When I got sentenced, they gave me some of the things they took back, some possessions that were, not extremely valuable, but I was glad to get some things back. So it was a very bizarre scenario. So
where does that money go to? Back to Amex or?
No, it goes to the Queens County. I guess they auction off the items, like they seize it. They get a check, they write it. I guess it goes to whatever they designated it for.
Is that because Amex never? Well, someone must have reported this. Did you ever find out? Did Amex
Yeah, it was
report?
like a private investigator on the individual side.
Oh,
like,
that just triggered all of this.
Yeah, and then that's where all the chargebacks came in. And then Queens County tried to take, the DA was like, we would like to thank our prosecutors for working so hard, or our detectives for working so hard on this. It got delayed, I realized, because of COVID. That's why it took so long from 2019 to 2021. They're like giving themselves a pat on the back, but they failed to really mention that it was some investigator in California that gave them all the information and just passed it on. They're like, hey, this is your jurisdiction. Like, do you want to take this on?
So what did you plead out to?
So like I said, I was facing a 10-count indictment, like all like first degree identity theft, second degree, all these different things. I had pled to attempted grand larceny in the third degree, which for like less than $3,000 is what it means.
Why even attempted?
That's, I mean, I wasn't going to argue with but I don't know. I think so I could have gone to trial. Here's the other thing that I wanted to like let people know. I could have gone to trial. I had retained my lawyer. It cost $100,000. They just bled me for 2 years ago. They bled me for all those chargebacks. I owed my lawyer $100,000. That's what his services cost. And then they got me on the restitution. Like they took like straight cash, like 40,000, the investment accounts, and then some money in checking accounts. I think that amounted to be like around 100,000. That was like, they could have been liquidated. You know what I mean? The rest were just possessions. So I ran out of money. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I can take this to trial and try to just get off completely. But he's like, if you take it to trial, he's like, it's going to be another 150,000. And then now I'm rolling the dice, and I know they're going to be pissed off too if I take it to trial, because I'm going to try and embarrass them. But I was like, had to really think about it, pros and cons. I'm like, do I try to pay 150,000? Which I couldn't at the time. I couldn't afford it on $150,000. It wouldn't have been possible. And then risk rolling the dice and somehow losing, he said, she said type thing. Or just taking the quote slap on the wrist, the attempted grand larceny, which they offered me, 52 weekends. I wasn't really worried about the charge because I work for myself, so I just decided that was the best route to go.
So what happened to the middleman? Because he or she sounds like the real criminal in this. It sounds like they were stealing from their client.
Yeah, nothing. And I didn't want to go after anybody, and I didn't want to go after their team because like this person has way more money than I do, so it wasn't worth the battle. So I just let it go.
So is it basically, to sum it up, they were using their client's credit card, buying stuff for themselves from you?
To be honest, I even to this day, I can't tell you what exactly happened because I was dealing with them for so long, and like they only accused me of stealing from this client from like October 2017 to like February 2019 when the chargebacks started coming in. But I was working with them since 2014, you know, so.
But it doesn't make sense what the crime is. Someone must have.
No, I know, but but they never wanted to go after them either. So, and like, I can't press them to go out. I think like I was the fall guy. They were happy with the headline, and they got some money out of it. They got, I don't think they even thought it was justice. You know what I mean?
But from your perspective, do you think that middle person was the one that was the one stealing?
I couldn't tell you because this person has such a large team that it's impossible to say.
So do you feel like you were wrongfully accused and convicted then?
Yeah, I mean, look, the way I look at it is who has a white collar crime that usually typically, like as yours, isn't turned into a Fed case? Because it was technically, I was buying and sending things across state lines. So even my lawyer's like, I don't know how this isn't a federal case. Thank God it wasn't, because it would have cost way more. And I wouldn't have got that type of sentence at all, you know what I mean? But also, I've never, like, who faces 25 years and then gets weekends and then gets charged, is allowed to plead to attempted grand larceny, and then I get restitution, but it's not even nearly, it's $1 million less than what I was accused of stealing. So it doesn't make any sense.
So now when you get sentenced...
Objectively, it doesn't make any sense.
Normally when you get sentenced to, say, prison time in state court, they take you right away, but because this is weekends, how does this work?
So the whole thing was completely unorthodox. So my lawyer's like, you're probably gonna have to do an allocution where you have to get up in front of the court, and he's like, you still have to tell him you did this. I don't care what you think or what you don't think. You're gonna have to tell him you did this. You're pleading guilty. If they say you did this and you have to do an allocution, is that what it's called? I believe that's what it's called, allocution, where you confess your crimes in front of the judge, right? So we'd go for sentencing. The unorthodox part is the judge is like, the ADA is like, we came to an agreement. He's going to do 52 weekends served at Rikers. The judge is like, that's a thing. They still do weekends. The judge didn't even know about it. The judge is like lost in the sauce. The ADA is like, yeah, that we confirmed they still do it. They're like, okay, whatever. Sounds good to me. And then they were like, we extended it 2 months out. So I didn't have to report. I got sentenced like March 20th something. And then we extended it to like May 7th where I was able to report for weekends.
Tell us about what a weekend's like at Rikers.
So I tried to look up information before I did the weekends. I was like, what do the weekends entail? Like, if you try to look up weekend sentencing, there's really no information about it. It's extremely rare. Doing my podcast, starting out and putting my story out there, I had a few people reach out like, oh, I did it. Or people are like, I didn't know that existed. A lot of people don't know it exists. That's the predominant reaction. A lot of people are like, oh, I knew about it, but that was back in the 90s. It's typically for DUIs, owing child support, alimony, things like that. Very minor offenses. So mine is definitely super and my 52 weekends was also very unconventional. But when I looked it up, there was really no information about it. And my lawyer knew about it because he had a former client that did it. And he told me about it, but he also didn't know anything about it. So to get to Rikers, you have to take a bus over the bridge. So I drove at the time. So there's a parking lot on the other side of the bridge. So my first time I reported in May, I drove to the lot, parked, got on the bus, and my street clothes, took the bus over. You walk into the visitor center, and then I'm like, hey, I'm reporting for the weekends, whatever that means. And they're like, oh, okay. Take a seat, and they look into it, and I hear them like calling dispatch. They didn't know which facility I was going to. So like my anxiety is to the roof because, and the other crazy part about my weekend sentencing was, even though it was 52 weekends, it was only Saturday morning to Sunday. So I would go in Saturday morning. I think 9 a.m. was what was written down by the judge. I had to report by 9 a.m. Saturdays, and I would get released sometimes they got released later, 5 p.m. on Sunday.
So not even a full weekend.
No, it was I would guess about 32 hours or so, approximately.
And during the week, you're not on house arrest or anything?
No supervision. I could do whatever I want. As long as you reported, no supervision. Nobody, no type of PO or anything like that.
Most guys will come and they say that, they didn't actually do the crime that they were accused of, but then get sentenced to say like a long sentence.
Right.
But your sentence is such a sham, like it's believable that you didn't do it.
I would have COs. They're like, "How long are you in here for?" Because they knew I did the weekends, and they never really got to talk the week. I found out at the time there was only like 2 or 3, and I've spoken to a reporter like since like in the last 3 years. Each year, there's only been about 4 or 5 guys doing weekends for the full year. Out of Rikers are approximately right now anywhere around 5,000 inmates. So 5 out of 5,000 is insane. But I was there for 52 weekends. That was the thing where they got me. Most guys that I was in there with, I met one weekend guy that I did time with because he would come in before me, but we would get released at the same time. But he was only there for like 3 months. But he did like he did Friday night to Sunday evening. Or I heard some guys did Thursday to Sunday morning or something like that. So usually everybody did it longer, but they would do it they would do longer stays for the weekend, but they would do it for like 3 months. They would knock out 3 months.
So is there a separate unit for you? Or are you getting like a different cell every time? How does this work?
So that's where the anxiety came from. I didn't know what was going to happen. And they finally bring me to, so I was basically in PC at all times. I was never put in Gen Pop. I was never put in the main houses. I was originally put in the facility called West Facility. And it's just these different pods. But your cell, you're secluded. So it's PC. And then nobody can get to anybody else. You're behind these like insane, I think it used to be like a quarantine thing back in the day. So you have these crazy like hospital like doors and they're super heavy. And then there's like a door. And then through that door, that's the main door they lock. And then through that door is like a little like area where they have like not cabinets, but a shelf, whatnot. Because some guys are in there for a long time. You can see they have like newspapers over the windows. They have like hella books and commissary stacked up. But for me, I've never had anything. So, and then you would go in, it had its own shower, it had its own TV, it had its own toilet. So I'd be in the same cell for 32 hours. And then every week I would go in there for a while. You never knew which cell. You would get put in a different cell, but in the same housing unit, which was called West Facility. And I guess that's where like they would put the people that were agitators, people that couldn't stay out of trouble. You know what I mean? They were that maybe ratted people out. I don't know the need, but it really wasn't much communication because you could never be face to face with someone, you know.
This just sounds like one massive inconvenience.
Like, I want to be grateful. Like, I learned a lot from what happened, and I understand it could have been a lot worse. Like, it sucked ass. The biggest challenge was like the mental aspect of it, like being secluded for 32 hours. I know people can be like, I'm not putting anything down on anybody's story or my story is definitely completely different than people that are in there that have no bail, can't afford bail. They're in there, they didn't do a crime. They're in there for a very low misdemeanor, you know what I mean? Or falsely, whatever it is. There's a lot of people in Rikers that are getting, you know, they're in there right now. That's completely unfair treatment. It's a disaster in there. It's a humane, and it's super inhumane in there. Everything, it's disgusting. It's disgusting, right? And even for me, it was disgusting with the weekends thing. But I still want to be grateful that at least I knew that I was getting out the next day every single time, right? The first day, I didn't know what the hell was going to happen. I'm like, I hope they come for me. What if they forget? How do I get a hold of anybody? Do I get phone time or whatever? And yeah, it was surreal. But
so you never even ordered commissary, probably, right?
I couldn't get commissary because commissary, nothing happened on the weekends, no security. So what started happening, I started learning the tricks of the trade as time went on. I realized like one guard one time, he's like, you bring any snacks? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, just bring some snacks next time. So I was like, all right, I'll try it. Worst that happens is they confiscate or whatever. So I started bringing things slowly but surely, like snacks. And then I realized by the end of it, I was bringing hella snacks last week. But I ate like shit, and that takes up. I don't like eating like crap. That took a mental toll on me. You know, I would stay up super late the night before and get no sleep so I could try to sleep as much as I possibly could. I would bring in books, though. They would let me bring in books. I had the TV. So that's how I passed time. I would basically try to get in there, sleep into the evening, stay up for the evening, crash late at night, wake up late Sunday, and then boom, like 3 hours, 4 hours. And I was out. But that messed with you mentally because you have to reset going into Monday or going into Sunday night. And I hated that, you know, and then eating like shit all weekend and sleeping like shit all weekend long in there.
So now during this time, are you dating? Are you married? What is that like going through this? Hey, I can't see you this weekend. I'm going to Rikers.
So I started I really kept it to like super close family who knew about it or with my friend group. Like I didn't really tell anybody basically. I would still go out on the weekends. I would go out Friday night sometimes to stay out as late as possible. I would literally go out. One time I went in with a hangover though, a really vicious hangover, and I was like, dude, this has got to be the worst. This is the dumbest shit you could ever do. I have a blasting hangover in Rikers, sitting in the cell. I remember just like, what the fuck is this? Is ridiculous. So I started in May. In December, I reached out to a girl that I knew. We were friends for a while back. She had left New York, and I took her out on I planned a date with her. We started talking for a few weeks, and I planned a date with her. I was supposed to be on a Monday, and I didn't tell her. She knew I got arrested, but we didn't bring it up. You know, I found out later she knew back when I initially got arrested, she knew this story. But I got arrested in 2021. Now this is almost 2023. It's December of 2022. So almost 2 years later. And I asked her out and we agree. And then I would always put my phone away when I would go in for the weekend. They would give me a bag where I would change out of my street clothes and change into the jail clothes. And I would put my phone in there and turn it off, and I would get back. And we were texting, and I remember, and I was like, hey, would you just, I disappeared for a whole day and a half, and I didn't tell her, but I was going to tell her in person. And we ended up getting dinner that night. We were supposed to get it on Monday. She was like, oh, do you want to get dinner tonight or whatever? Instead, I'm hungry. I was like, sure. And she's like, what about 8 o'clock? I'm like, fuck, I got out. I got 3 hours to get mentally prepared. I just did the weekends. I got to get, ready. And we go on this date. And at the end, before I got a chance to tell her, she told me that she knew I did the weekends. Cause I told one of the very few people I told, she ended up hanging out with her. It was a girl. They were friends, and they were hanging out the night before. And she told her, she's like, oh, Dylan does weekends, right? And she's like, what do you mean? What does that mean? She's like, yeah, he's in jail for right now during the weekends. She's like, what the fuck are you talking about? So she knew, but then I told her before I was telling her. And then she was like, oh, yeah, I already knew. So-and-so told me. I was like, damn, what the fuck? I was supposed to be the one to tell you, but she was cool with it. And then literally, she's amazing. We got married. We ended up getting married. She hung with me through all the weekends. I would hang out with her the night before. I would check in, and yeah, she was super supportive through that whole process. And then we ended up getting married. We've been married for almost 2 years now. We got married a year after we started dating, a little more than a year after we started dating. I met her in December. We got married the following February.
What did your mom think about all this?
I think I almost gave her a heart attack during the initial arrest. The weekend, she was always worried because she never, and I never really told her about what it was like on the weekends and stuff like that, because there was a couple of times where I just wanted to rip my hair out because it was such a shitty experience, like I said. And going back, I don't want to take away from anybody that was in there or is still in there for long periods of time, unjustly. But it doesn't matter who you are. Nobody wants to deal with that shit. Nobody wants to be in Rikers, and nobody wants to be in solitary, which kind of even if it's 32 hours, it still messes with you to have no social contact with the world. I had the ability to get the phone, but I swear I was just like, I don't need the phone. I'm only here for 32 hours. Let the other people who need the phone have the phone. So I would never call anybody or anything like that. And guys would mess with me, the CO sometimes. They'd be like, oh, you're probably happy you get away from your wife for the week. I wasn't married at the time. They didn't know what my story was. They're just, you're probably happy you get away from your family for the weekend. I'm like, yeah, sure. I was just bullshit. Because none of them knew my case either. You know what I mean? I only told some COs once because there was a group of them and they were just bullshitting. They're like, what are you in here for? I'm like, you can just Google my name. And then they're like, what? And then they did it right in front of me. And they're like, what the fuck? But besides that, I never told anybody, any of the other inmates that I did come across. I would have conversations a few times. I would get out with the weekend guy that we got out at the same time. He never asked me. And so we never talked about it. And the other inmates, they didn't even know what the weekend thing was in there. I had some guys who would try to talk to me across from the cells. I would usually try to just keep to myself and ignore them. But a few times I entertained, There was one guy in there once, and he was talking about how I overheard him, and I felt bad because whether he did it or not, I don't know. But he was claiming that he was falsely accused of murdering his girlfriend, and he had been in there for 6 months, and he hadn't even gone through anything yet. He was still way pre-trial, and he had been in that unit for 6 months. So some guys are in those same solitary spot, and they let them out, but they put them in you don't even get open yard. They put you in a cage area. So they get some yard time, but I think it's an hour. The rest you're 23 hours in that cell. So we were talking, and I was like, I'm doing weekends and these bullshit. He's like, oh man, well, why don't you bring in cigarettes, Lucy's and stuff like that? You could sell them and make good money. I'm like, bro, I don't need the money that bad. And I'm like, why would I do that? I already have it good. If I do that, they're gonna revoke my sentence, and I'm gonna go to court and have to do it all over again. I remember there was one captain that was super cool. He would tell me stories, And he was like, yeah, one guy came in hammered once that was doing weekends, like got to the visitor center where you would always have to check in before they would put you on a bus and bring you to the facility and change. And he was like, he was so drunk, I had to put him, like, I had to call the court, and they put him in the main housing area and in a holding cell, and he probably got his weekend sentencing revoked, and they laid the hammer down on him probably. So I was like, I was never gonna do anything that put me in jeopardy of bringing in contraband or whatever like that. So snacks are not contraband. I ended up bringing in a remote because no commissary. So security on the weekends were the only ones that could give you batteries for the remote. Most of the time I would get into a cell. There was a new cell every week. There would never be a remote, or if there was, they took the batteries out of it. You needed to get security to give you the batteries. Security didn't work on the weekend, which makes no sense. Who gets off? Security gets off at the weekends at Rikers, apparently. So I just snuck in a universal remote with my own batteries, and I ended up having that the whole time I had it. So they just change out all the TVs to flat screen TVs. So every weekend now I was able to hook it up to the TV no matter what, because otherwise I would have to ask for a remote, and chances are a guy wouldn't give you two anyways. And I talked about on my podcast, one of my first experiences, I got a remote from somebody. It was like the Stanley Cup finals I wanted to watch late at night, and I put it on and I had the volume up, and then it was so loud I couldn't turn it down. I had already given the remote back and everybody's asleep now. And I couldn't fall asleep the entire night because I had the TV on too loud. I'm sitting there taking the toilet paper and trying to like slam the pillow in my ears. I stayed up all night. Like I literally, it was a terrible idea. So I was like, I got to figure out a way to do this. So I got a remote, and then they ended up moving me to a different facility at one point during the summer randomly. I went to check in. They're like, oh, you're going to NIC now, which is called, stands for North Infirmary Command. That's like the medical facility of Rikers, like where anybody that gets, like, God forbid, stabbed or has any type of medical situation going on, they bring them there. But I was also put on a floor again in solitary. So it was like cells this time where I could see all the way down the row of cells, but same thing, you weren't allowed to get out of your cell. Like nobody was allowed out of their cell. And those ones, same thing. It didn't have a shower. It was like an actual cell, like a small cell, and it had like a TV in it. And then I left my stuff. I used to keep my stuff in that bag. I would always leave the remote in the bag, so I never had to bring it back in. But my bag got left over in West facility, so I had to restart now. Now I had a remote, but there was no sound. So you had to get a radio through commissary, which I didn't have access to. So what I bought a radio and snuck in the radio so I could tune it to the frequency of the TV. And then eventually they moved me back to West facility again. So
when you finished your sentence, did you have probation, or was that it?
No, that was part of the pros and cons as well, as why I decided to do it, because there was no probation period. There was no restitution. Like when I was done, I was done. And then I can get my sentence, sealed.
So it's not even on there. That was like
no, it is right now, but like in like 4 more years, it can be completely, the record can be sealed.
Okay.
So
how have you been able to rebuild your life since then? We're, what are we, 2 or 3 years later since you completed that?
I completed this 52 weekends in April of 2023. Yeah, so it'll be 3 years now almost. I lost it. The learning lesson was I was able to focus more on myself, and COVID helped do that anyways. Like I started stop caring about a lot of the things I cared about at the time. Like I'm completely out of the fashion thing. I still like nice things, but I don't really care. That's not my business anymore. So I was falling out of that. I lost some clients. Some of them just distanced themselves and have come back. There's more people that I realized doing this that didn't realize that even happened in the first place, which I was kind of surprised by. I just assumed that everybody knew about it, but not everybody did know about it. So now I'm coming out and some people are like, you did that? And I'm like, yeah, but it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. And they're like, whoa, so they're interested in the hearing about it when I told my own story. But I just dealt with it. I closed my inner circle because there's a lot of people that I helped out. I put a lot of money in their pockets by buying things. And, I was young and stupid and being naive and spending more. I mean, I was doing well for myself. I was investing money. I was buying things that retained value or upkept in value or rose in value. And but a lot of people I helped out, I had to cut off because they never hit me up like, yo, bro, what's going on? Try to hear my side of the story of it. They just took it for face value and they distanced themselves even though it's like, what do you have to distance yourself from? You're not the one that's in trouble. You know what I mean? Nope. They never went after anybody that I associated with. It was literally always me. So even the guy that I live with, like, that's a whole different thing. But even I don't talk to him to this day because he, he distanced himself. I'm like, bro, a lot of people I thought were like close friends really weren't close friends. So there was a growth thing there. And then I just continued chugging along. And like a lot of people are like, look, I don't care. You never did anything to me. And that's the other thing I'll point out. A lot of athletes, out of all the people I deal with, I'd started my own business in 2013, buying and selling the high-end items. Since 2013, I got arrested in 2021. Not one person, not one client or friend or whatever came out and said, oh yeah, he ripped me off. You know what I mean? Not one person. So I was able to see, like I said, who were friends, who weren't friends, kind of cut that off and then just build upon. A lot of those guys, the athletes, I'm good friends with them and whatnot. So I keep in touch because it's good for networking and whatnot. So I've, recently started my own business again, and I was doing that. I was still doing entrepreneurial things, even while I was locked up. So yeah.
Are you more cautious with how you conduct your business now? Just in regards
I'm cautious with everything, spending money. I'm way more frugal about things. Like I said, I would go on Instagram and I would intentionally flex because it looked good for the optics. Like it looked like I was living a luxurious lifestyle. A lot of the items I was purchasing posting were for clients. Some were mine. A lot of going out and spending money. I would split it up amongst 4 other individuals who also had money. So it's not like it's just me spending insane amounts of money by myself. It's like there's always 2 sides to the story, right? But yeah, I'm frugal about money more so. I'm more conscientious about like putting money into things that I think will create long-term value. Like I said, personal relationships. I don't really open myself. This is me opening up myself, you know what I mean? Telling people what they didn't know about me. I had a lot of support though from people. It's like this cliche thing. People say like people that don't know will support you more than the people that were closest to you. And that's kind of how it worked out. Like I still have a large Instagram following. I'll post things. People interact with me. They respect my opinion. I don't necessarily know why sometimes. People reach out to me like, I think it's cool what you're doing. I'm glad you're telling your story. I didn't know about that. But it's people I don't even know. It's people that have been following me on Instagram. I've never even met them. Where a lot of people, like I said, that I would go out and party with them and pay for everything. And it's not about the money. It's just like, hey, like I took care of you. I didn't need anything from return, but it's just like you could have just asked, like, hey, hope you're doing good, man. Like if you need anybody to talk to, that would have been simple. I would have been happy with that. You know what I mean? To this day, there's some people I think everybody's got their own problems, right? So they're like, not my problem, I guess. So that was a learning lesson too. People be selfish when you need somebody, when you need people to help you out, people show their true colors.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Dylan, I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me share my story.
Of course. Thank you for sharing. And I wish you the best in the future. And I'm sorry you went through what you went through.
It's all good. All growing opportunities. So.